Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of textual study of the Quran. We had started to study verses 104 onwards and they will end on 121. And with this, we will also be finishing the first section of Surah Baqarah. You would be remembering that from the first part of the surah, which was actually the introduction, started off from verse 1 and it went all the way up to verse 39. And then from verse 40 onwards, right up to verse 121, which we hope to finish today. This whole section is basically one in which the charge sheet against the Jews in particular and the people of the book in general has been presented. And you would recall that at various instances in their history, which has spanned almost 2 millenniums, if not a little less, they were guilty of breaching their covenants. They were guilty of making promises time and again, flouting them. And again, the mercy of God being stirred and forgiving them for their blemishes. But once again, whenever the Almighty would ward off the punishment or would deliver them of any scourge, they would once again go back to their own ways. So we are talking about verses 114 and 115 that will be studied today actually. Before that, we had seen how they would make they would indulge in this prank that when they would come to the gathering of the Prophet, they would say Ra'ina, and they would slightly stress this syllable and it would say Ra'ina, which would mean our shepherd, but the word is actually Ra'ina, which means please bear with us, please give us time, repeat what you have just said. So the Quran, I explained this last time, giving them more respite and very graciously giving them more respite, keeping in view the fact that there were individuals in them who still had a chance of reverting, who still had a chance of giving up their ill ways. So the Almighty gave the Muslims a new word, and He said that instead of saying Ra'ina, say Unzurna. They mean the same, they both have the same meaning, but they would not be able to play the prank with Unzurna the way they would do with Ra'ina. So one of these pranks, as I said, has been discussed here, and then also we discussed how they were guilty of asking or harassing the Prophet in the same way as they did Moses, as their own ancestors did Moses. And believers being those weak believers, those weak in faith, they are told that if you continue with the same attitude as did the people of the book or the Israelites with Moses, then this would be absolutely unbecoming of you. We also saw how the Prophet was actually told that although these disbelievers wanted Muslims and believers to come back to the folds of Jahiliyyah or give up their religion, and the reason for the Jews for this was that they were absolutely jealous, incredibly jealous, and the words are hasadam min indi anfusihim. They did not want the new prophet to come from their cousins or the lineage of the Ishmaelites, and this was something that really tore them apart as far as their venom and their anger was concerned. And again, we find the Quran telling the Prophet that in spite of this unbecoming attitude, be patient, and for this patience, adhere to the prayer and to zakat, and whatever you send forth through your hands will be with God. He knows all that you do. And as far as these Jews and Christians are concerned, they are people who think that unless you become a Jew or a Christian, you will not be delivered. And they are followers of Abraham, but the fact is that Abraham was not someone who was either a Jew or a Christian. He was a devout Muslim, or Hanif Muslim, which is a devout Muslim. And moreover, they would also not only make these qualms, they would also go on and say that unless a person is Jew or a Christian, so this was something they would start off with. But the Quran has said that they might seem united to you, but the fact is that وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ لَيْسَتِ النَّصَارَى عَلَى شَيْءٍ. They would have this tremendous animosity with each other. There would be daggers drawn. So one of them would say that the Christians have no basis, and the Christians would say that the Jews have no basis. And this is something in spite of the fact that they read their own book, which is the Torah, which tells them that, well, as far as the last prophet is concerned, he is going to come and you have to follow him, you have to obey him, and he will also lessen your burden. Some of the things that have been made incumbent upon you because of your misdemeanor, they will be lifted from you. So this is the place that we had reached, and the final verse that we had studied last time was that such is the nature of these differences and these intense differences that don't think, so Muslims are being told and believers are being told that don't think that in spite of all of your trial, all of your efforts and struggle that you might do, you'll be able to win over their hearts or be able to resolve their differences. This is not the case, because the Almighty says that there are some differences which only I will be able to resolve once you come to me on the day of judgment. So this is going to continue, and you must not be under any misconception that these differences might get resolved. So now let us move on with the remaining part of this section, and starting off with verses 114 and onwards. I'm going to just read out the text and translation. So, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَنْ يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Because of these disputes that they have amongst themselves, they are guilty of causing desolation in one another's places of worship. And who is more unjust than the person who seeks to forbid that in places of God's worship his name be mentioned in them, and who seeks to cause desolation in them? So forbidding the name of God being taken in them, and also trying to make them places where these brawls might occur, or just leaving them to their own, and so that people they're drawn into themselves and they don't even come to the mosques. So it says, it was only proper for them to enter these places of worship while fearing God. However, they became rebellious. So now they shall face humiliation in this world also, and in the world to come too, a grievous punishment awaits them. This happened because some of them regarded the east to be their Qibla, and some the west. And the truth is that to God alone belong to the east and the west. So at the bidding of God, whichever way you turn, at that very place is the countenance of God. Undoubtedly, He is vast, all-knowing. So once again, you can see another chapter in their history is now being projected in the Quran, and you can see that one of the things that had caused those disputes, or the consequence of those disputes, was that they went as far as to cause this desolation in their mosques. And it does seem that a tussle that might have taken place between the Jews and the Christians in the Baitul Maqdis. So we know that both of them turned to Baitul Maqdis, and even outside the Baitul Maqdis, they continue with this brawl wherever they would get this opportunity. But the Quran says it was not befitting at all for them to ruin the places of worshipping God after receiving guidance from the prophets of God. So this is something which is absolutely uncalled for. The right attitude for them was to enter such places with fear. So مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَنْ يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. So instead of trying to ruin these places of worship, they should have entered these places of worship while fearing the Almighty. So as I said, the Baitul Maqdis was the Qibla of both the Jews and the Christians, and it probably seems that the Christians had made its eastern side their Qibla, owing to the fact that Mary had sat down there for itikaf, that we know from the Quran. And the Jews in their opposition must have adopted its western side as the Qibla. So as a result of this difference, a grave fight took place between the two, and each of them violated the sanctity of the other's place of worship ruthlessly. So one of them took the eastern side and the other western side. And precisely this is the reason why the Quran says, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ. The east and the west belong to God. So instead of fighting over the direction of the Qibla, or the direction where you have to face when you offer the prayer. This is immaterial because it is basically God who says where you have to face. So, فَأَيْنَمَا تَوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. And we have to also make note of this fact when the Almighty says, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ, the implication is that the real thing is the directive of God. He is the owner of the East and the West. So at His bidding, in whatever direction they turn, they would face the Almighty. So it's basically God's directive that has to be followed, and it is not the East or the West. So if they become slaves of their own ignorance and prejudice, this is something which is obviously worth lamenting. Otherwise, as far as God is concerned, in Allah wasi'un alim, He is profound. His knowledge is profound, and He embraces everything. So this is like a comment which is being made on their naivety, that how they have taken to the directions east and west and not realized that it's not a direction which matters as much as the directive of God itself. So now let's move on to the next part. It says, وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا سُبْحَانَهُ بَل لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كُلٌّ لَهُ كَانِتُونَ بَدِيعُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَإِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. Then, not only this, so lowly are these claimants to salvation that they say God has children. وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ وَلَدًا Subhana. So, in reply, they say, undoubtedly, as far is He from what they attribute to Him. In fact, His only is what the heavens and the earth contain. All are obedient to Him. He alone is the originator of the heavens and the earth. And when He decrees a thing, He only says, be, and it is. Kun fayakun. So this is again something which is being stipulated here, that as far as the Jews and the Christians are concerned, so they have their own problems, and we have seen, or we shall see as we go along in the Quran, especially in Surah Tawbah, where it is said that both the Jews and the Christians ascribed children to God. And this is something which the idolaters also did so. So they regarded the angels to be daughters of God. So in this way, all these three denominations which existed in Arabia in those times, the Jews and the Christians and the idolaters or the mushrikun, all three of them ascribed children to God. So the Jews of Arabia regarded Uzair to be the son of God. The Christians of Arabia regarded Jesus to be the son of God. And the idolaters regarded the angels to be daughters of God. So it is here that they are just said that, well, if God has children, then this is something that you say out of your own accord. You don't have any argument in its favor. This is said elsewhere in the Quran, and that is why ascribing partners to God is said. It is called as iftara Allah, imputing falsehood to God. So badi'us samawati wal ard, and He is someone who creates out of nothingness. So ibda' in Arabic means nothingness. We as individuals, as human beings, for us, creation requires some material, something out of which we create. But to the Almighty, He does not require anything. And this is something that we cannot imagine. But this is what the Quran tells us, that when God creates, He does not need any material for that creation. All that He needs is to utter the word, be, kun, fayakun, and then that thing comes into existence. So the implication is that how foolish is it to ascribe sons and daughters to a being who needs no one, who is beyond everyone and is all powerful. So if He would have needed children for his own aid or His own help, this would have been something which would have been known. But when someone as mighty as the Almighty does not require any such help from His children, how foolish is it to ascribe sons and daughters to someone who's absolutely beyond such needs. So now, before we go on to the next part, if you have any questions regarding these couple of verses that we have studied, please raise them now.
So, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. I know you started with the Ra'ina. I just wanted to confirm the Jews used to twist that word, and I just was wondering what they used. And the second question, which you don't have to address today because I know it might be a long discussion. the Uzair in Quran is not necessarily Ezra, which some of the old Muslim Mufassirin have noted in their books. So, but thank you very much.
Right. So, as far as your first question is concerned, yes, the Jews played this prank. So, instead of saying Ra'ina, they would say Ra'ina. So, they would add a Ya after the word Ain. So, in Arabic, the word Ra'i means a shepherd. And when you say Ra'ina, it would mean our shepherd. And this they would use to demean the Prophet. So it was not any praise or anything that they would laud the Prophet with, because after all, a shepherd also has a positive connotation. But in their mind, it was as if he was not a prophet of God. He was just their shepherd who was just trying to mind them and the way that these shepherds do. So basically, it was like an insult that they would raise against the Prophet. And the Almighty said that, look what you are doing. I mean, you're not even respecting or granting that respect which a prophet deserves. So the point that I was making earlier on is that the Quran would have easily scolded these people, especially. And remember, these were people who were Jews, and I mean they would come to the gatherings of the Prophet, and some of them would be disguised as Muslims, and most of the hypocrites that had entered the folds of Islam, a vast majority of them were the Jews. So in this regard, they are specially told that because these people might come in the garb of hypocrisy to you and address the Prophet in this way, and they will play this word in a way that it is pronounced slightly differently, and then they would make fun of the Prophet. So Muslims are told that stop using this word. So the point that I was making earlier on was that they could have been taken to task by the Almighty, but the Almighty as yet had asked the Prophet, as the words have said, Farfu anhum, that ignore them. Just let them be, because there are still individuals among them who might learn, who might turn back, who might revert. So the noose was not yet tightened against their necks. In fact, Muslims were told to adopt another strategy. And this is something that you'll see very often in the Quran. In Surah Tawbah, you'll see this. In Surah Ahzab, you'll see this. In Surah Nur, you'll see this. The Median surahs in which this mischief was let loose by these hypocrites, because they had undertaken to undermine the character of the Prophet. They would have liked to bring his household into disrepute, and they were playing all sorts of pranks. And a whole series of directives were given to the wives of the Prophet that they should not go out in a certain way and stay put in their homes, and don't speak to them in any way that they would feel tempted as if they are talking to them in a nice way. So a whole bunch of directives were given to the Muslims, to the household of the Prophet, and to common masses, that, well, still there are people amongst them who might mend their ways. So instead of getting hold of them, the Almighty switched and said, well, you should take some other measures in order to save yourself from their pranks. So the important thing that we need to note is how far the Almighty goes in His grace, how magnanimous He is, that He would like, even if there is a few people left who could turn back to religion in any way, then He gives that opportunity. And precisely this is why we often stress that, you see, when there is this Itmamul Hujjah, in which the truth is conveyed in its ultimate extent, you know what it means? It means that there is not a single individual who now remains who has that even small an iota of sense left in him, in which he would still consider the fact that, well, I am being arrogant, I am being jealous, and I know what the truth is, but I'm still not going to understand, still not going to accept it. So you see, this is the extent of their arrogance, after which the wrath of the Almighty really, really rages. And this will make us understand that why there are so many verses, especially those surahs which deal with this Itmamul Hujjah topic, in which the Almighty is so angry. Because it is not that the people in front of the Prophet have any excuse left for them, not a single excuse. Had there been even a slight excuse, the Quran tells us that instead of getting hold of them, the Almighty would have given them more grace, a period of grace, and told the Muslims to back away, as it is done here. The Prophet is being told, Farfu anhum, just ignore them. So such is the extent of the concession which the Almighty gives, which as a result, when that concession does not remain, then of course, then his wrath rages, and I think we would understand why this anger does so to such an extent.
So the Itmamul Hujjah happened with the Jews or not? Did it occur? Because they were
Of
never
course,
punished. They were never
they were
eliminated.
they were punished. You see, the Quran tells us explicitly in Surah Tawbah, قاتلوا الذين لا يؤمنون بالله ولا باليوم الآخر ولا يدينون دين الحق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب حتى يعطى الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. So this is verse 29 of Surah Tawbah. So the Jews and the Christians they are being told that if they, because of the fact that they are now left with no excuse to deny, so they only have two options. Either if they want to stand on their own faith, then they should pay jizya and remain subservient to the Muslim empire, or they should get ready for a war. So these are the only two options that they had. So we know that this happened in Khaybar, this happened in some of the other parts when the Prophet was alive in Arabia, and then once he departed, there was a whole series of campaigns which were conducted by the Sahaba against the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire, and then the Persian Empire, precisely on this basis. So as far as your other question is concerned regarding Ezra, so this is a debate that is going on amongst various Mufassirun, and personally I don't have any opinion, but it does seem to me that, he looks to be the same person. He's the same prophet as Ezra, who was regarded to be the son of God. But remember, this is only the Jews of the times of the prophet of Arabia, in Arabia. So outside of Arabia, he was not regarded to be the son of God. This is something which only those Jews who inhabited the Arabian Peninsula who were guilty of this.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab.
Wa alaikum assalam.
The ayah walillahi al-mashriqu wal-maghrib. So a Christian or a Jew now, won't they be able to make the same argument for the Muslims? They say, but why you face the east, northeast now? Why you do that? If the Allah is everywhere, why you are just when praying face the Kaaba?
So you see, this is what the Quran has actually replied, that the direction is not something which is important as much as the directive of God in which we have to face in a certain direction. So it's not the direction itself, but God's directive to face in a particular direction. So when you fight over the east or the west without God giving you sanction of this, you are just using your own intellect or your own whims in deciding to pray wherever they would like to pray. So as I said, this was one of the things that people have derived, that because Mary stationed herself in itikaf on the eastern side of the temple, so they regard the eastern side to be the Qibla, the Christians, and in opposition to them, the Jews did the western side. So, they had no sanction for this from God. So what is being told to them is that east and west is immaterial. If you have sanction for the east, well, you have to pray towards the east, and the same thing goes for the west. But trying to settle it for a direction of your own accord because of certain happenings that go on in these directions has absolutely no basis. It's the directive of God. And as far as the verse is concerned, فَأَيْنَمَا تَوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ, that wherever you turn, you find the countenance of God, it only means that God is everywhere. But in spite of being everywhere, He still has chosen one direction towards which you have to pray. So it's not in the direction of God, facing God, that you have to do it, but in the direction in which God has chosen you to pray in a particular direction. He has chosen that direction for you. So basically, again, they are being reminded that it is not your own whims or your own desires which are going to settle or decide the direction of prayer. It is the directive of God that you have to follow.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. So do we have time for another question?
Yes, we have.
Ms. Annie, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if it's too long a topic, then we can talk about it later. But in response to the first question, you talked about Itmam al-Hujjah. And I just wonder about the dimension of place when you talk about time. So we do say that, it's people in the times of the Prophet they have received the complete message. So they are the ones to whom those verses that you mentioned apply. But at the same time, just it's a physical impossibility that all Jews or all Christians or all pagans in the time of the Prophet got the message the way that people who were located in Mecca and Medina did. So when we say Itmam al-Hujjah, should we not also consider the dimension of space in addition to the dimension of time? And then my other question was, why is the Quran, and maybe it changes later, but why is the Quran so basic in terms of its critique of Christology? The beget and the begotten, that's a very, very basic form of Christology. Whereas at the time of the Prophet, the council of, a couple of councils had already happened. And at least as far as the Christian thought was concerned, the concept of, Jesus being the Son of God wasn't just based on his divine. I mean, it was a very sophisticated, at least philosophically sophisticated concept. But Quran doesn't engage with that concept. Why is that? Is it because the Christians who were based in Mecca and Medina had a very basic concept of Christology, or is it because, why is there no engagement with it?
So, as far as your first question is concerned, you have mentioned the fact that just as time is of consideration, space also should be of consideration. So, what do you mean by space?
I think place, more like place. So
that is understood. I mean, when we say about the time, it doesn't. I mean, time doesn't come without space or any place. So, of course, the Jews and the Christians of the times of the Prophet living in that space, living in the territory of that we call Arabia, are the ones who are addressed, because obviously the Quran was revealed in Mecca and Medina, part of it at one place, part of it at the other place. And so this is how, I mean, we already have presented it, that space is as important as time. And the concept of a locus is, of course, is not imaginable without the place being understood to have been there. So when we say time, of course, space is understood.
So in other words, when we say that Itmam al-Hujjah happened, we're saying that Itmam al-Hujjah happened to the Jews and Christians and pagans who were living in the places where the Prophet lived, but not beyond.
Right. Not beyond. Yes, of course. Absolutely. This is of
Even at the same
fundamental
time.
importance. Oh, yes,
all right. No,
absolutely.
thank you.
Absolutely.
That's
Yes.
helpful. Thank you.
And as far as the question that you have raised in your second statement, is that Christology that was there. I mean, remember, there is this Christology which is presented as a popular belief, and then there is this Christology which is owned by their scholars. So the Quran is basically commenting on that basic Christology, because from that Christology had arisen those intricate thoughts and details, out of which, I mean, they were just an elaboration of that basic Christology. So basically what the Quran does is that it strikes at the base of every issue, instead of talking about those intricacies, because you see all those intricacies in which the form of Jesus or the form of God, or the fact that there were still Unitarians amongst them, or the fact that there were people who did not regard Jesus to be flesh in his own body, and he was regarded to be a divine being. So all these were basically marginal sects. And the basic Christology on which the Christianity stood, or Judaism stood in that space, or in that background, was the one that has been very, very simply raised by the Quran in Surah Ikhlas, the last surah of the Quran, actually. After that, Surah Falaq and Surah Nas are just prayers which are like sentinels guarding this treasure of Tawheed. So basically, it was this concept of Tawheed which they had dented. And this concept of Tawheed had arisen because of regarding God to be father of a son, and similarly to have been begotten by someone. So this was actually the Christology that lied at the base. The rest were just, I mean, I would say, like, there are toppings on a cake, there are fancy things that you might like, but at the base lies the same concept. So it had to strike at the base. And I think that if you study contemporary Jewish and Christian history, you'll see that how it actually invoked a lot of anger and wrath from Jewish and Christian scholars of those times. Even the Quran has at times narrated that how they were adversely, or they were actually, they were taken aback, and how they thought that, well, this is one area in which they would have no compromise, and they felt as if they were being struck at the very core of their beliefs. So I think that this Christology is something that lies at their base, and their own reaction depicted in their own books and in the Quran does show that this was the base that had to be set right.
Thank you. Maybe we'll follow up when we go to chapter 3 on this.
Inshallah.
Many thanks. Adil Qureshi, you're ahead. Please go.
So just wondering about this statement that you made about Allah Almighty being patient and His Prophet being very patient with these munafiqun. They were trying to insult the Prophet right in front of him, on his face, in the presence of Sahaba. Just
Right.
wondering if this should give us some lessons about when we hear insults being hurled, these poisonous remarks made by the Islamophobes. How should the Muslims of today react? Is there some guidance in this ayah for us as well?
Absolutely. I mean, these are the verses that have to be read over and over again, that how he would bear with those insults and not react with any sort of something that would really put him off. He didn't even do so. And I often give you this example. I think I've given this in the past as well, that the Ifk incidents in which his most beloved wife was accused of adultery, I don't think there could have been anything worse for him. And this went on for quite a significant number of days. It does seem from ahadith and hadith literature and historical literature that it was like a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so, in which this whole incident had spread far in Medina, and none other than his own wife was accused of adultery, and there was nothing to defend. And the Prophet was being told to be patient, and it was God who actually revealed the defense when God Himself decided that it was time now for these people to be taken to task. So yes, these are verses in which we have to understand that as far as such grave insults are made against him, how the Almighty still regarded, well, there could be some chances of people coming back to the truth. So therefore, instead of tightening the noose against their necks, what happened was that the Almighty said, well, you be patient. And look at how a whole conduct was laid before the wives of the Prophet, that they should not go out. Kunna fi buyutikunna, wakarna fi buyutikunna, that you must stay put in your houses, and that you should not talk to these people as if you talk politely to other people. And you should, if they ask something from you, you just you just do it behind a hijab or some curtain. It should not come out before them. So you see, the news was tightened, so to speak, against the Muslims. So this is the graciousness of the Almighty, and at the same time, how He teaches us that if people insult you, then the best way is to answer this insult through your own character, your own conduct, instead of reacting. Okay, so for now we move on to the next verse. This is verse 118 and 19. وقال الذين لا يعلمون لولا يكلمنا الله أو تأتينا آية كذلك قال الذين من قبلهم مثل قولهم تشابهت قلوبهم قد بينا الآيات لقوم يوقنون إنا أرسلناك بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا ولا تسأل عن أصحاب الجحيم. And in a similar way, those who have no knowledge of the book of God have also said, why does God not speak to us directly, or why does not a clear sign come to us? So these people that are referred to here are, of course, the Bani Ismail, the Ishmaelites, or the Ummiyin. So the fact that the words are la ya'lamun, it actually refers to the fact that they were not acquainted with any wahi or divine revelation after the departure of Prophet Ishmael. So there was no book that had been revealed until, of course, Prophet Muhammad came. So that is why they are called the Ummiyun, or people who do not know. So when it is said they do not know, it actually means that they do not know they have no knowledge of divine revelation. So this is being said. So in other words, what is being followed up is that besides these Jews and Christians, something that you must also note is that the idolaters too followed suit. And they too said that, well, we should be shown a sign. And that is why the Quran says, كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِمْ, that precisely in the same way, a similar demand was also made by those before them. So when they said that they should be shown some sign, of course, referring to the previous people of the book, it was no different. And then the Quran says, قَدْ بَيَّنَّا الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يُوقِنُونَ, that the hearts of them are all similar like. This is something which is already said, تَشَابَهَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. And to those who want to have conviction, we have made our signs clear in every manner. Thus, it is not your responsibility to show them signs and miracles which they desire. So this is what the Quran has stated here, especially, that as far as these miracles are concerned, I mean, whatever you show them, this is not going to create any difference in their life. They would still demand more, and this is stated elsewhere. So it says that we have sent you forth a prophet with the truth as a bearer of glad tidings and a deliverer of warnings, and you shall never be questioned about these companions of hell. And this is something that has been said in the Quran at other instances as well, that as far as life is concerned, your target is pretty clear, that all that you need to do is to present the message of God. You are not going to be asked about these people who ultimately end up in hell. So a reference to the idolaters of Arabia for centuries, as I said, they were people who had not been aware of any divine revelation, and that is why they are said La ya'lamun. And since they are the leaders of the Quraysh and much superior to Muhammad as far as their influence and authority are concerned, they would say that why does the Almighty not directly address them? So in other words, the Quraysh would say that, well, I mean, we are superior than you, and we have a better living. So why does the Almighty not address us? And at some other instances, the Quran has answered this objection, but it's not been answered here. So you can clearly see that the objection has been cited, but the answer to this objection has not been given here. And the reason is to allude to the fact that this demand is so foolish that silence is its only answer. So at times, the Quran remains silent just to say that how foolish is this demand that it doesn't even require an answer. The extent to which keeping silence could hit the vanity and conceit of the leaders of the Quraysh could not have been matched by answering their objection. And when it says that you have to show them a sign, so by sign they meant something so pronounced that those who see it openly declare that the person who has shown it is surely a messenger of God. So, for example, as we know in Surah Baqarah, in some of the other surahs, it is said that an angel should descend with the messenger and proclaim his messengerhood. So, as if the angel is coming down from heavens and he's saying that, well, the one that you are witnessing as God's messenger is a messenger of God. So, they would say that this is something that they would like to see, or at least some trail of the punishment be shown to them at his initiation. And the sign that these people were demanding was also similarly demanded before them by the nations of other messengers. So those people who were guilty of stubbornness in demanding a sign, once the truth had been irrefutably made clear to them, and these Jews too were following suit. And just as the hearts of those people had been sealed, similar was the case with the hearts of the Jews. So that is why the Quran says, تَشَابَهَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. Their hearts are similar. So just as their hearts have been sealed, no truth can enter them. Similar is the case with these people. So the Jews and the idolaters are absolutely on the same page. And they will only observe faith after they observe their punishment. So as far as the implication for those who want to believe in the Prophet of Muhammad is concerned, they do not need a miracle or a sign. So the counter is actually implied here, that the counter understanding, that these people might be requiring a sign, but for those who believe in this prophethood because of the signs and arguments which are found in his favor already, they are never asking for a sign. They never asked for a sign. They didn't ask for any verification or proofs. And this is something that they have to understand. And if they don't understand this, then, O Prophet, it is no duty of yours to forcefully make them accept faith. And if these people, in spite of that, they end up in hell, La tus'alu an ashabil jahim, you shall not be asked for what they have done. It is their responsibility. Now let's move on to the next verse. وَلَن تَرْضَى عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ قُلْ إِنَّ هُدَى اللَّهِ هُوَ الْهُدَى وَلَئِنِ اتَّبَعْتَ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ بَعْدَ الَّذِي جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ مَا لَكَ مِنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ وَلِيٍّ وَلَا نَصِيرٍ. These Christians, these Jews and Christians shall never be pleased with you unless you adopt their faith. Therefore, say, God's guidance is the only real guidance. And you should know that if after the knowledge that has come to you, you yield to their desires, you will not have any friend against God or anyone to help you. So, this is one of the styles of the Quran that I think people who have attended my other course regarding the stylistic features of the Quran would recall that there was this very special feature of the Quran in which seemingly the Prophet is taken to task, nauzubillah, and as if the Almighty is actually rebuking him for something wrong that he did. But as we have understood from elsewhere, that this is just a style of the Quran in which, although a particular personality is addressed, the direction of that address is entirely opposite. So, like the Prophet is being addressed, but actually the Jews and Christians are being told that this is not going to happen. So, the behavior adopted by them has been termed as following their desires, because a person who insists on following his own way after God's guidance has come to him is like a person who is following his own desires. So, it is very evident that the warning and the wrath found in the address is actually directed towards the Jews and the Christians. So, when it said, مَا لَكَ مِنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ وَلِيٍّ وَلَا نَصِيرٍ, that if you yield to their desires, I mean, look, it does seem very harsh that the Almighty is telling the Prophet that if you succumb to their desires, then there will be no friend or helper who can protect you against God. So clearly we can see that this is something which is actually the brunt of this address is directed towards the Jews and the Christians. The Prophet is addressed, but it's like a slant, and this slant is directed towards the Jews and Christians, and this occurs on numerous occasions. And the reason that the Almighty at times adopts this style, once again, is what I was just referring to, that the extent of that anger is toned down. So when you address someone directly, it escalates that anger. I mean, it tells us how angry the Almighty is. But when you don't address that entity or that denomination, and instead of addressing that denomination, you address someone else and let the denomination itself understand indirectly, well, that they are being actually addressed, then this actually tones down that anger and remorse and rebuke, and at the same time it gives them time to think more. So this address in itself is something which once again reflects the mercy of the Almighty, that instead of rebuking and scolding the Jews and the Christians directly, he would talk to the Prophet and let that anger be faced by him. Not that he was worthy of being facing that anger. No, this was not the case. But the fact is that indirectly the same anger was to be deflected to the Jews and the Christians. So this was like a deflected address. And this deflection is something that we also do at times, that we would like someone to be conveyed a message, but we would not directly address that person so as not to invoke him in any way and not to hurt the ego of that person, and let people who are there still think about what they have done. And this is again one thing that is something which is very beautiful and something very, very inspiring for us to see, that how far the Almighty goes to accommodate other people. So let's finish off this part and then we can take questions. And this is the last verse, verse 121. الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ أُولَٰئِكَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِهِ وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ. You should rest assured that to those who we have given the book, and such were they that they continue to read it the way it should be read, it is they who shall believe in this guidance, and those that deny it shall be among the real losers. So you see, the Prophet is being told that the real people who would believe in this book are the people who actually believe in the Torah. So الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ refers to the Torah. So the Almighty is telling the Prophet that you know what? The people that are going to really believe in the Quran are the ones who really believe in the Torah. And يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ. This is a very special style of the Quran, and it actually means that they read the book as it should be read. They read the book as it should be read, which means that so far as it is worthy of being read, they go in depth, they give its full due, and therefore it must not be dismissed in a very perfunctory manner. They go very deep, and the Prophet is being told that if there are people who are not accepting faith, it is because that they have not read their own book in such a depth. It is because they are avoiding their own book, or they are not reflecting on their own book. So if you think that people are running away or they are not accepting faith, it is not that you are at fault. You see, this is one of the assurances that is often sounded to the Prophet, because after all, he was also a human being, and he would get frustrated. He would say that, well, he's doing his best, and why is it that these people are running away from something that they were already expecting? So time and again you would note in the Quran that the Almighty assures the Prophet, which tells us that how human he was also, that he would get frustrated, he would get disappointed, and the Prophet was time and again told that, well, it is these people, if they are not accepting your call or the Quran, it is not because you are at fault. It is because they themselves are at fault, and the fault is that they have not properly read their own book. So with these words, you can ask questions regarding the last couple of verses that we have studied, and after that we'll start off with the literal translation.
Many thanks, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. Adil Qureshi, please go ahead.
So this linguistic tool that you spoke of, where Allah Almighty did not address them, and this is a sign of mercy, couldn't it be argued another way? That the reason why Allah would not speak to a person is because he's so furious with them that he does not even consider them worthy of his address. So he's addressing them indirectly.
Right. So this is equally applicable. I mean, it is left to the discretion of the person who is describing the text. So these are very nuanced instances in which there is a very subtle difference. At times, you're absolutely right. The reason that the Almighty is not addressing them directly is because He's so annoyed and angry with them, and He does not think them that they are worthy of address. Yes, this happens a lot in the Quran. At other instances. But then there are instances in which this indirect address also serves, as I said, to be a deflected address, so that people who are still there, who can mend their ways. The reason that I prefer this second of these options is because you can see from the context. Earlier on, the words were farfu anhum, just forgo them, let them be. Once again, the purpose being that, well, there might be some good people among them, and instead of taking them to task, or instead of having them having them punished, give them more time. So to me it seems that the context, because it is already speaking of the fact that these weak in faith Muslims or these hypocrites are being given time, so it does seem here also that it's not that they are not being worthy of being addressed, that is the real reason that they are addressed indirectly. But it does seem that because of the fact that the context tells us that it is because of the fact that there are still people among them who might mend their ways, because of which the Almighty has not directly addressed them. Otherwise, as I said, it would have become extremely harsh.
Thank you, sir.
Many thanks. Next question is by Imran. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you very much for a very good explanation. Just a quick question. We hear all the time that Quranic teaching is universal and timeless for all times. But when about haqqa tilawatihi, that if the Jews, their books are not preserved, or the Christians, and let's say if we take the people from our time, a lot of it's not preserved. Can we blame them because even if they read their own book, they may not be able to completely follow our book? That's number one. And the second is, how does Allah know? And I know Allah has the knowledge, but showing those people who are asking for very clear signs, that showing them would not help them. Because, yes, thank you.
As far as the first question is concerned, haqqa tilawatihi, this is something of a very, very important, it's an important area that we have to really take stock of. that even in the distorted state, even in the interpolated state, the Quran says that still the evidence of the coming of Muhammad was clear to them. This is what the claim of the Quran is, that yes, they did erase his name, yes, they were guilty of interpolation, but even after that interpolation, as you can see, I mean, if you would like to have more details, you can study the works, some of the aspects that have been raised by Ustaz Hamiduddin Farahi in his book, Fi Man Huwa Zabih, which actually translates as Who is the Real Son, which Abraham presented for sacrifice. But whilst attempting to answer this question, he has also commented on how the name of the Prophet was mentioned in the Torah, and today, although the name is not there, but the sentences which are still there, they are so you're so sure that they could not have been spoken about anyone else that the Prophet, other than the Prophet, that even in this changed form, they only needed to pay heed to some of their own verses of the Torah that would have led them to the right conclusion. Like, for example, I mean, if you read the Gospel of John, if you talk about the New Testament, there are so many verses in the Gospel of John, like saying the Prince of the world is going to come. Until I go, he's not going to come. When he's going to come, he's going to stay forever. After me, he's going to come, and his reign will be forever. So all these sentences, without mentioning the name of the Prophet. And if you look at the Old Testament also, Moses telling people that God will raise up someone from my cousins, from my parallel community, and he would speak his words through his mouth, and he would take to his account. And then the famous Paran prophecy, which is mentioned, and there are a host of other things. Of course, they are not our topic at the moment, but if you look at the prophetic literature in this regard, or the prophecies that are still found in the Torah and the Injil, without the name of the Prophet Muhammad himself being there, they are so clear that they could have only been spoken of Prophet Muhammad, that unless a person is absolutely arrogant or jealous, he wouldn't have denied them. But having said that, if there is any excuse left for them, I mean, again, if they have done their worth, I mean, they have done their due diligence, they have done their studies, and in spite of them, they think that, well, these sentences could not have belonged to the Prophet Muhammad, and they might have come up with some other explanation. To my mind, I think, in all sincerity, if this was a conclusion that they had drawn after expending all their effort and energy, I think they would be given concession in that.
Yes, makes sense. Thank you. And then, as far as that, the first part about that Allah knows everything, He has the knowledge, but those pagans and Jews that were asking, I know Jews asked Moses that they needed to see the God, and now pagans are asking for making similar requests, right? And we're saying that the ones that believed, mu'min, actually believed without having those signs shown to them. But in this day and age, we could be asked, well, I like to have more clear signs, but that's not a good argument.
No, these are two different things. You see, to be shown a sign of punishment, or to be shown God Himself, would finish the test. So the believers would not demand such type of signs. The signs that they would demand have been mentioned copiously in the Quran, and the Quran says that look at your own self, look at the heavens and the earth, look at the precision and the timing, look at the system of Rabubiyah which is found, look at your own conscience. These are also signs. So the Quran says that these are signs which should sufficiently make you focus or attentive towards the existence of God or the hereafter. But the nature of the type of the signs that disbelievers would demand would be a category apart. I mean, they would say that we'd like to see God Himself, or we'd like to see an angel descend with the book and pronounce that, well, this is the book of God and this is a person who is being designated as His prophet. So they would in fact not content themselves with these signs, which were enough for them to have understood the existence of God. They would demand much, much more, and they would in fact demand some miracles to be shown. And those miracles were, I mean, at times they were shown, but the nature of those miracles was not the one that we are just discussing in the form of signs. They would be as if, as I just said, that angels should descend and proclaim that this person is a prophet of God. So the nature of signs demanded by disbelievers and the nature of signs which believers require, I mean, they are different categories. And the Quran is commented on the first part and is said, or the part which comes second, that as far as the signs are concerned which a believer requires, this is precisely what the Almighty has done, that He has spread and scattered those signs all over the universe and even in our own being. And that is something which will lead you to God. But if you ask that you should be shown God and then you'll believe, then this is something which, of course, is not going to be happening, and at the same time, it would end the trial.
Makes sense. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very good explanation. Thank you.
Many thanks. Ms. Annie, please go ahead.
Thank you. And so the same verses, 118, 119. So if I try to put myself in the consciousness of the Jews and Christians of the time, now they have some knowledge of faith, they have received scriptures, and they have stories which tell them that to the prophets who came before Muhammad, there were requests for signs, and those signs were presented. So if you have that historical consciousness in mind, and the scriptures and the stories, it doesn't seem wrong to ask for signs, because there's a history and there's an expectation. So it seems to me that these two verses are, again, in the context of the previous verses as well, they are more stressing the divinity of God and the fact that the prophet is just a human, and basically saying, you're asking Muhammad for these signs. He cannot produce those signs. The signs can only be produced by God. And then kind of that same iltifat that you mentioned in verse 119, and then saying, Muhammad, your job is not to provide them signs. You're here to basically do what we have asked you to do. So if you could comment on that reading, and then I have one other follow-up.
You see, I mean, the issue at hand is quite different. If you read the first part of verse 118, it actually refers you to certain signs which were not just signs which God has actually scattered, as I just referred to. Look at what the Quran says. It says, "Laula yukallimun Allah." Why does not God speak to us? You see, so speaking could only we know that God speaks to prophets of God. He doesn't speak to ordinary people. So the nature of sign that they would demand would be a category apart from the signs that we as normal human beings would demand and would be replied to. So I think if you just look at some of the demands that they would make, these were not ordinary signs that they were required to be shown. They wanted to see God Himself.
So I agree. They're saying, why does God not speak to us? And then there's an or why does not a clear sign come to us? And if you look at the miracles which were performed by Moses, Jesus, Javed, those were not ordinary signs. They were, miracles.
I mean, if you look at the context, it's not that the miracles of Jesus and Moses are being demanded here. There is this tankir. Tankir means that the word ayah does not have an alif lam, is undefined, and this tankir actually speaks of tafkhim, which means that some magnificent sign, something so outstanding, as if God is right there in front of you, or as if you have seen God Himself, something to that category. So the word ayah, because of the fact that it is undefined, is not referring to a normal sign which other prophets of God, I mean, they were still abnormal, so to speak, but to the extent that God allowed them to be shown. The fact is that the word ayah, the way it has been declined in Arabic without an alif lam, it tells us that some huge sign, and this huge is not the same as what Jesus or Moses had shown to them, to their respective nations, but something as compelling as talking to God, something very near to it is being referred to here.
Okay. I understand your position. And then moving on to the last verse, 121.
Right.
So isn't this verse basically an acknowledgement that the scriptures which were being read at the time were, even though there were some twists or deformation of meaning, as the Quran alludes, but they were reasonably preserved. Because,
Right.
even elsewhere, I feel like, in exegesis and in commentaries, tahrif in these scriptures becomes a sticky point every time we
Right.
get to that point that you mentioned, which is that, somewhere in some translation of the original scripture, Muhammad was foreshadowed, and that doesn't exist anymore. And to me, as a believing Muslim, or, even if I put myself in those times, it doesn't matter if Muhammad was foreshadowed or not. But for some reason, for exegetes, it's a really big sticking
Right.
point. And I feel like
It is.
whenever there is attack on these scriptures, the prime lens basically is that there is tarif because it doesn't have mention of Muhammad arriving. Whereas when
Correct.
you read this verse, or even in Al-Ma'idah, when you read 568, it basically suggests that, if people of the book are reading the book that they were given, they're in a good place.
Of course. So, as you said, that yes, this is a sore issue amongst Muslim exegetes, and they precisely it is for this reason that they are totally dismissive of the previous scriptures. This is something which I, of course, or I would say the Farai approach does not in any way condone. So to them, it's like a total dismissal of the previous scriptures. Whereas if you read the Quran, it says "Musaddiqan lima bayna yadayhi," that the Quran has come in confirmation of the prophecies that were found in their own books. So it's like it's lending credence to them in a lot of respect. So I think there are a very couple of instances that can be pinpointed as regard as tarif is concerned. One of them is, of course, the name of Prophet Muhammad not being there, but in spite of not being there, we still have sentences that point to his name. And the other is to cut off the relationship of Abraham with the land of Arabia. And if you look at some of their literature, they have set up Abraham to have settled there in Palestine forever, and all these places that you find like Marwa, which is the place where sacrifice took place, to be they said that, well, this is not found in anywhere in Medina in Arabia, but in Palestine. Similarly, because Isaac was settled in Palestine and Ishmael was settled in Arabia, they also deleted his name and said Isaac was a son who was sacrificed or presented for sacrifice, so that the relationship of Abraham with the Arabian Peninsula and with the last prophet is severed. So these are the two main areas in which interpolation has taken place. Other than that, I think that 90% of the scripture, maybe even more, is absolute consonance with the Quran. Yes, there are translation issues. Yes, there is a lot of translation and history being mixed up with the original text of the Torah and the Injil, which we can see at times if we go through the source critical analysis of the text. But other than that, it's so close to the Quran. So yes, I do agree with you on this count. And somehow, not only because of this dismissive nature, but also because certain ahadith of the Prophet point to the fact that he actually stopped people from reading the Torah. He did not like Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu to have read the Torah when he was reading. It is reported in some instances. So he stopped them from reading it. And such narratives, because they are found in our hadith books, they have further given credence to what they believe, that these are the books that have been totally interpolated and the Quran does not like them in any way, and the Prophet himself has discouraged them. That has given this general or popular belief that, well, these books should be stayed away from. Otherwise, as you said, that the Quran gives an entirely different picture. It does. Look at what the Quran says. It says, "Fihi hudan wa nur." In the Torah and in the Injil, you have hidayah, which is guidance, and nur, which is light. And the Prophet, these Quranic verses are not talking about when the Torah was revealed. It was talking about the Torah or the Injil, which existed in the times of Prophet Muhammad, which of course had already been interpolated. It was not there in its original form. Even then, the Quran has praised these books, and there are so many other verses that can be cited as well. So I think that this is one area in which work has to be done, and these verses need to be dished out and presented to a lot of scholars. And even more than that, I think that this verse in the Quran which says that you have to believe in all the books of God. So how could you believe in the previous books without reading them, or without acknowledging what is written in them? You cannot be blindly accepting the Torah and saying that La nufarriqu bayna ahadim minhum, that we don't differentiate between any of them, and the fact that I believe in all the books of God. So, I mean, all these things to me present an entirely different view of the previous scriptures.
But Dr. Shehzad, if you say that, then that kind of contradicts, the discussion we had where, the position that you took on verse 262. Because that's where I think you took the position that, you have to be a Muslim, which if I read 568 or this verse,
Oh, yes. So, I mean, you see, what I'm saying is that the Torah, it's the way it existed in his time, in the Prophet's times, was still something which had a lot of truth in them. But I'm not saying that not believing in Prophet Muhammad without any reason and just sticking to their own, adhering to their own scriptures would be sufficient for them. I positively think, you look at what the Quran has said at the very beginning of Surah Baqarah. It says, Aminu bima anzaltu musaddiqan lima ma'akum, that once I have come to you, you have to believe in me and the book that has been revealed to me. These are verses 36 or 37 of Surah Baqarah. I mean, the Jews are being told that Aminu bima anzaltu musaddiqan lima ma'akum, that you believe in what has been revealed to me. So you see, the whole of the Quran is not just telling them to stick to their own scriptures, and that is all that you need to do. It is telling them that if you stick to your own scriptures, you'll automatically be led to this book. And this is what this verse has also said, that ulaika yu'minuna bihi, the people who read their own scriptures, allazina atainahumul kitaba yatlunahu haqqa tilawatihi, ulaika yu'minuna bihi. Bihi means this Quran. People who read their own scriptures the way they need to be read, in fact, these are the people who are going to profess faith in the Quran. So, positively accepting faith, or accepting the Prophet as the final messenger is a requirement. Yes, what we talk about in that verse 262 is that there could be instances in which a person is afforded enough excuse or enough grounds of not accepting him, but then they have to be grounds sufficient, which could grant them this remission. Otherwise, maybe carelessness, for example, or not giving that thing a serious thought. These are all things that would be taken into account by the Almighty.
the book is the same, right? I mean, so it's not that
It is
God
the same. It is the same, but still, the Almighty wanted the last edition of His book to be revealed to a final prophet, because the book, of course, does not exist in its original form. You see, one thing that we have to understand is that the message being the same is one thing. The Torah and the Injil, even the proponents of these books, the adherents of these books, know that they don't have it in their original languages, and they have been lost to posterity. Yes, they have very good translations, but still the original is not there. And the Quran says that the final book has this quality of being the Mizan and the Furqan, which means it's the decisive scale in which you can weigh things to be right and wrong. And for this, the Quran says, unless you have the book in its original language, this cannot be done. So one of the reasons for this is that the previous books, yes, we have them in quite a reasonable shape, but not in their original language, not exactly the way they were revealed. So that is why the Quran was revealed, and then God Himself took upon Himself to protect the Quran, that it does not change the way the Torah and the Injil were changed.
Okay, thank you.
Many thanks. We have one question from the chat by Fabia Ehsan. The question is in Ayah 121. People who are following the Tafsir bil Rawaya approach state that reading of the book is about Quran recitation and acting upon its instructions. Whereas in today's lecture, we have come to know it's about the Torah.
Right.
What argument do we have here to adopt approach that this is about the Torah and not the Quran?
I think the people who believe that it is the Quran which is being referred to here, they need to provide some evidence, because we are talking about the Jews, we are talking about how they are behaving against the Muslims, and it is about their book or their beliefs which is being called to question. So, there's no reason. There has to be some reason in which you need to justify that. Why is it that suddenly Muslims are being discussed here? So the whole context tells us that the charge sheet against the Jews is being presented, and the Prophet is also being assured at times that, look, if these people are not accepting faith, then it is not because you are falling short. It is because they are not paying heed to their own book. So unless you sever this verse from its context, from what has been said earlier on, you just cannot have this interpretation. This interpretation has only arisen because people have severed this verse from these previous verses and has taken this verse to be an individual verse. And when I read it individually, I'll also say, well, yes, the Quran is being referred to here, because what else can be said that these are the people who read the book very nicely. And you'll also find that the scholars of the people of the book of the approach of Rawaya, you'll often find them that whenever they present this tajweed, or the fact that the Quran should be read in a very nice way, this is the verse that they present, that they should read the book the way it should be read, which means that they should read it in a very melodious voice, in a very moving voice. So, I mean, you can just see from the context that there is absolutely no way that you can insert the Quran, unless, as I said, you sever this verse from the previous ones.
Thank you so much, my dear teacher. So today has been another wonderful day. We have had marvelous discussions, and we are great, and we appreciate that we have such audience who think and make us think more and more. We don't have any more questions, and it's all up to you. What would you like to do?
Okay.